This is outstanding.
I want to ask you one more thing as we kind of land this plane here and wrap up. And it's related. I've heard you talk a lot about young men in particular, and I'm very interested in how the next generation is experiencing the economy. I think there's sort of an economic hopelessness that has set over the younger generation, especially men. Of course, we know a lot of the statistics about different drug use and ending their lives and withdrawing from the workforce. I think I try to be pretty moderate on this. It's pretty fashionable to bash that generation and say they don't work hard enough, but I know them. Of course, I'm a bit younger myself. And there are a few structural problems, I think, that make it very discouraging to try to get ahead in the economy. One is home ownership is very difficult. I think the average age of home ownership now, first time buyer is like 38. You can correct me on that, but it's getting older and older. It used to be much younger. And then people aren't getting married and having kids. And as a younger man, those are the two biggest motivators, aside from my faith, for working, providing for your family, and being able to buy a home. And so if these men can't buy a home reasonably in a near-term way, especially because inflation might outpace their savings account, and then they don't have a family to provide for, I'm not excusing it, but I think if you don't have a faith, it makes a lot of sense to just kind of give up if you don't have some inner core mindset or motivation from scripture to push you. So you hire a lot of people. You have managed to take your faith and channel it into the economy. I saw someone in National Review called you the apostle of the free market, which I thought was such a great name. So what's your message to young men when you think about combining faith, working hard, and overcoming discouragement for young people who feel like in some ways the economy is much harder to get ahead in than it was for their parents? And then often their concerns are sort of waved off as just like, oh, there's just the kids today are so lazy. And sure, some of them are, but I think there's some valid points to be made in their favor.
Yeah, so there's a lot to chew on there. Let me start by acknowledging that if there's 3 to 4 million able-bodied men in their mid-20s up to late 30s that have disappeared from the workforce, and a significant amount of them are gaming the system, are living at home till their 30s, are playing video games or smoking pot. And we don't believe that they represent the tens of millions of people in that age group, that it's a very high number and it's very discouraging. But I don't want to paint with the broad brush of saying all of Gen Z is like this or all of Gen Y was like this, okay? So there is a significant real sociological and moral and cultural challenge somewhere between 3 and 4 million men in that kind of far extreme. But what you're referring to is people that want to work but are discouraged by other things. I first of all would point out that you brought up a couple things that I'm not sure are totally separate from one another. When we say, well, they're getting married later, and also it's harder to buy a home, and also they don't have motivation in the work, I don't think that those are 3 separate things. I think they feed on each other. And my view of the Christian life is that we have a choice between things that will run into a negative feedback loop, they will self-reinforce in a negative way, or by living faithfully and hopefully and lovingly, we can create a positive feedback loop that self-reinforces positively. And I don't think a lot of Christians like what I'm about to say, but I'm positive it's the faithful and biblical answer. There are things sometimes that are discouraging, that are a setback, that are upsetting, and you could say they're unfair. You just simply have to overcome it by playing into the discouragement of, I can't believe how expensive it is to buy a home now. Let's count the positives for one thing, because as much as people talk about it's harder to get ahead than it was for my parents, is that totally true? I mean, almost every person who's saying it is holding one of these things in their pocket, and it has more personal computing power in their pocket than all of IBM mainframe had in the 1960s. You know, we have technological advantages that are very, very different. So with that said, the housing price issue is one that I've been very outspoken about that I think is grotesque. It has not been just the left. Left and right-wing forces have advocated policies that have kept housing from getting built, that is undersupplied, and have advocated monetary policy that has made it very difficult. That whenever people are asking for interest rates to be artificially low, they are boosting the price of homes, that is making it more unaffordable. So these interventions in the market, whether they're well-intentioned or not, whether they're coming from a Republican or a Democrat, they become part of the problem that make homeownership less affordable. Ultimately, in a free market, there is always going to be challenge and there's always going to be opportunity. Spiritually, I don't know of a choice anybody has but to wake up with a certain relentless optimism, whatever those challenges are, including unfair ones, that they will overcome. But when I say overcoming unfair challenges, I don't mean to minimize some of the issues people are legitimately dealing with. I have tremendous empathy for it, and I've devoted a significant part of my adult life to trying to help in these regards. But I also am aware of the other side of this coin, that self-pity and victimhood can become very parasitic. It can really take over someone's mentality, both heart and mind, and make their success more difficult. Ultimately, the positive feedback loop, and this comes back to your point about people marrying later and then feeling that they aren't motivated in work and the unaffordability of the home. The virtuous cycle I believe in versus the vicious cycle is a generation of young men that are more marryable and more employable, because I believe more marryable men are more employable and more employable men are more marryable. So I am not convinced that the issue of deciding to get married much later was a result of these problems, but perhaps in a lot of cases a cause of some of the problems. There a lot less housing stock was built and a lot more multifamily apartment buildings were built because the average marrying age went from 24 to 34. And so people were putting off household formation and the market had to respond to that. That didn't start as a market force, that started as a cultural force that the market had to respond to. So we can reverse this with a strong determination to build strong families, to marry young, stay married, be faithful, be monogamous, have children, and be responsible providers that are ambitious in our work. That's a formula for a happy, content, fulfilling life. It's also a formula for an economy that works for more people.